In the mountains of Colorado, a giant walks among men. 6'8", nearly 400 pounds of raw power and calculated precision. Not just a strong man, but a dynasty. Not just an athlete, but a phenomenon that redefined human potential. Brian Shaw wasn't born extraordinary. He made himself that way, through relentless discipline, scientific methodology, and a mindset forged in the quiet shadows of Fort Lupton, Colorado. 4-time world's strongest man. Record breaker, legend. But beyond the accolades lies a story of transformation, innovation, and the quest to become something more than nature intended. This is the story of Brian Shaw, the small-town basketball player who became the strongest man on earth, 4 times over. Fort Lupton, Colorado. Population 7,000. A place where the Rocky Mountains loom on the horizon and small-town values run deep. It was here, in 1982, that Brian Shaw entered the world, already bigger than average, but with no indication of the colossus he would become. His father, Jay, worked tirelessly in local government. His mother, Bonnie, a dedicated nursing professional. Hard-working, no-nonsense people who instilled in their son the Midwestern values that would later define his career: consistency, humility, and the dignity of hard work. Young Brian was tall from the start. By middle school, he towered over classmates and teachers alike. Basketball became the obvious outlet. His height gave him natural advantages, but it was his coordination, unusual for someone his size, that made coaches take notice. He wasn't just tall, he was athletic, coordinated, strong, a combination that took him to Western State Colorado University on a basketball scholarship. College showed Brian 2 important truths. He was good at basketball, but not NBA good. And his natural strength was something truly exceptional. While other players struggled with weight room requirements, Brian thrived. Where teammates saw gym time as a necessary evil, Brian found a sanctuary. The weight room became his laboratory, a place where he could explore the limits of his unusual frame. In 2005, fresh out of college with a degree in business, Brian stood at a crossroads. The conventional path beckoned: a regular job, regular life, perhaps coaching basketball on the side. The safe choice, the expected choice. Instead, he stepped into a local strongman competition on a whim. No formal training, no specific preparation, just raw power and athletic instinct. He won easily, and something clicked. In the obscure world of strongman, men lifting cars, pulling planes, and carrying impossibly heavy objects, Brian saw not just a competition, but a calling. A way to push his genetic gifts to their absolute limit. A path to becoming something truly extraordinary. Within months, he abandoned conventional career plans, liquidated his savings, built a makeshift gym in his parents' garage with equipment salvaged and welded together from scrap yards. This wasn't a hobby. This was an all-in commitment. The basketball player was gone, the strongman was born, and he was hungry. What separated Brian from the beginning wasn't just his size or natural strength. It was his mind. Where other strongmen approached training with brute force and tradition, Brian brought analysis, methodology, a scientific approach that would ultimately revolutionize the sport. He studied exercise physiology textbooks, consulted with sports scientists, tracked every workout with meticulous detail. His training logs became legendary. Hundreds of pages documenting every set, rep, recovery period, and physical response. Brian wasn't just lifting weights. He was conducting experiments with himself as the subject. He developed a nutrition program that was equally precise: 6 carefully calibrated meals daily, totaling over a mammoth 12,000 calories per day. Not just massive quantities, but specific macronutrient profiles timed throughout the day to maximize performance and recovery. Breakfast, 12 eggs, sausage, bacon, toast. Second breakfast 2 hours later. Lunch, 2 pounds of meat with pasta. Afternoon meal, more protein, more carbs. Dinner, another full meal with family. Evening snack, protein shakes, more carbs, carefully measured supplements. Eating became a full-time job, a grueling necessity that sometimes required setting alarms at night to maintain his massive caloric needs. Sleep was approached with the same scientific rigor: custom beds built to support his frame, sleep trackers monitoring his cycles, recovery technologies, from hyperbaric chambers to contrast therapy, incorporated year by year as the science evolved. Even his massive hands received special attention. Custom grip tools, specialized callus management, nothing left to chance, every variable controlled. His home gym grew alongside his ambitions. No commercial facility could accommodate his needs, so Brian built his own fortress of solitude, a laboratory of strength where equipment was modified, reinforced, and sometimes entirely custom-built to handle the loads he was capable of moving. The garage became a warehouse. The warehouse became a compound. Specialized equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Atlas stones ranging from 100 to 500 pounds. Squat racks reinforced to handle tons. Custom-built frames to simulate competition events. This wasn't just training, this was preparation on a military scale. By 2007, just 2 years after his first casual strongman competition, Brian qualified for the world's strongest man. The small-town basketball player was now on the global stage. He didn't win, not even close, but he watched, he learned, he calculated, and he went back to Colorado with a blueprint of exactly what was needed to climb to the top. Brian's international debut showed him the gap between good and great, between local phenom and world champion. The road ahead was clear but daunting. The dominant figures in strongman at the time were legendary. Mariusz Pudzianowski, the Polish 5-time world champion. Žydrūnas Savikas, the Lithuanian technician with unprecedented overhead strength. These weren't just competitors, they were institutions. Brian studied them all, their techniques, their training, their weaknesses, and he built a plan to surpass them. From 2008 to 2010, Brian's progression was methodical. Each competition showed improvement. Each year closed the gap. His frame continued to fill out, from 350 pounds to 385, to eventually over 400 pounds of functional mass. In 2009, he reached the podium at World's Strongest Man with a third-place finish. Progress, promising, but not enough. Back to Colorado, back to the lab. More analysis, more refinement. In 2010, second place. Closer, but still a silver medal. The hunger grew. The adjustments continued. Then came 2011. World's Strongest Man in North Carolina. Brian wasn't just prepared. He was a machine calibrated for domination. Event after event, he demonstrated not just strength, but mastery. Not just power, but strategy. When the final points were tallied, Brian Shaw stood alone at the top. World's Strongest Man. The title he had reoriented his entire existence to claim. But unlike some champions who reached the summit only to relax, Brian intensified his approach. The title wasn't the end of the journey, it was merely confirmation that his methods worked. Now it was time to build a legacy. The next years brought unprecedented consistency at the highest level. World's Strongest Man titles in 2013, 2015, and 2016. Arnold Strongman Classic victories. American record after American record. What emerged wasn't just a champion, but a dynasty. A man who didn't just win competitions, but changed what was considered possible in the sport. His deadlift climbed to over 1,000 pounds. His log press approached world record territory. His squat was mythological. But perhaps most impressive was his mastery of the sport's odd implements. The Atlas stones, the Husafell stones, the vehicle pulls that separate strongman from other strength sports. Brian wasn't just technically proficient, he was an artist, a master of his craft who made the impossible look systematic, methodical, almost easy, and all of it captured with a quiet, Midwestern humility that made him not just respected, but beloved. No trash talk, no controversy, just results and a handshake. The basketball player from Fort Lupton had transformed himself into the most dominant strength athlete of his generation. And he'd done it his way, with science, with system, with relentless attention to detail. As Brian's competitive achievements mounted, so did opportunities beyond the platform. Unlike many strength athletes who remain niche figures, Brian recognized the potential to build something bigger than titles. He launched a YouTube channel that offered unprecedented access to the life and training of a top strongman. Unlike the polished, edited content of other athletes, Brian's videos were raw, authentic, educational. He didn't just show the lifts, he explained the why behind every movement, the purpose of every exercise, the reasoning behind every nutritional choice. What began as simple training footage evolved into a media enterprise with millions of subscribers. Brian Shaw wasn't just a strongman anymore. He was a brand, an educator, an ambassador for a sport long relegated to late-night ESPN coverage. His subscription box business, Shaw Strength, delivered specialized equipment and supplements to fans worldwide. His coaching programs allowed everyday gym-goers to implement his methodology at their level. Signature equipment collaborations with major manufacturers put his name on products used in gyms across the globe. But perhaps most significantly, Brian demonstrated that strongmen could be more than cartoonish figures of brute strength. They could be articulate, strategic, business-minded professionals who applied the same discipline to their careers as they did to their training. He married Carrie Jenkins, a former high-level athlete herself, who brought additional business acumen to their growing enterprises. Together, they built not just a name, but an organization, a platform, a legacy that would extend well beyond competitive years. They started a family, 2 sons who grew up in a household where extraordinary achievement was simply daily life, where 400-pound men gathered in their home gym to move weights that would seem impossible to average humans. Through it all, Brian maintained the same approachable demeanor that made him a fan favorite. No security entourage, no velvet ropes. Just a giant of a man who remained grounded in the values of his small-town upbringing. The business empire grew, the competitive fire remained, but the human being, the husband, father, and small-town kid who made good, stayed centered through it all. No great champion exists without worthy adversaries. And Brian's era produced some of the most formidable rivalries in strength sports history. Žydrūnas Savikas, the Lithuanian powerhouse, represented the old guard. Technical perfection, decades of experience, a different body type, an approach that challenged Brian to evolve. Hafthor Björnsson emerged as a new threat, the massive Icelander whose Game of Thrones fame brought new eyes to the sport. Younger, with a frame that even dwarfed Brian's, a rivalry that would define the mid-2010s. Eddie Hall, the British record breaker with a 500-kilogram deadlift, brought new intensity and a contrasting personality. Where Brian was methodical, Eddie was explosive. Where Brian was reserved, Eddie was brash. These weren't just competitors. They were foils that brought out different aspects of Brian's approach. Each rivalry requiring adjustments. Each challenger exposing areas that needed refinement. The competitive landscape evolved rapidly. New events, new standards, new generation of athletes entering their prime. By 2018, at 36 years old, Brian was no longer the young phenom, but the veteran champion, the elder statesman defending his position against hungry challengers who had grown up studying his techniques. Mateusz Kieliszkowski, Martin Licis, Tom Stoltman, names that represented not just individuals, but the evolution of the sport itself. Age brings wisdom, but also new challenges. Recovery slowed, injuries accumulated. The scientific approach that had taken Brian to the top now focused increasingly on longevity, on managing the inevitable decline that comes to all athletes, even those who seem superhuman. His 400-pound frame, once his greatest asset, began extracting a higher price. Sleep became more difficult, joint pain more persistent. The massive food intake required to maintain his size more challenging. Still, he adapted, modified, evolved his approach to remain competitive in a sport that typically favors youth. When he couldn't match the explosive power of younger competitors, he leveraged experience. When recovery became more challenging, he refined his techniques to maximize efficiency. The championships became less frequent, but no less impressive given the context. Remaining at the elite level well into his late 30s in one of the world's most physically demanding sports wasn't just remarkable. It defied conventional understanding of athletic longevity. As competitive results became less consistent, Brian faced the question that haunts all elite athletes: what comes next? Unlike many who cling desperately to past glory, Brian approached this transition with the same strategic mindset that characterized his competitive career. A gradual, planned evolution rather than a desperate grasp at fading dominance. He shifted focus to exhibition events, custom challenges designed to showcase his specific strengths, television appearances that emphasized the spectacle of strongman rather than the rankings. He became not just a competitor, but an ambassador for the sport.
It's hard to listen to it unless you kind of get into it, and unfortunately that means sometimes you get injured and then you learn and say, hey, I probably should have listened a little bit more, you know?
I'm sure we could both look back on our careers and say, if we were a little bit smarter at times, we could have done better. You know, and I've done okay, and you've done, absolutely incredible.
His YouTube content evolved from competition preparation to lifestyle management, from peaking for World's Strongest Man to finding sustainable approaches to strength that could serve him through the coming decades. As he approached 40, Brian began a physical transformation. The 440-pound competition weight that had served him in his prime was no longer necessary or sustainable. He systematically reduced his body weight, not dramatically, but strategically, maintaining strength while reducing the burden on his organs, joints, and systems. This wasn't retirement, it was reinvention, a calculated transition from short-term competitive peaks to long-term health and influence. The business ventures expanded further: television shows, exhibition tours, collaborative events with other strength legends. The brand continued to grow even as the competitive focus narrowed.
And this is an ongoing thing that you and I have to work on, is not always talking about business. Right?
That is definitely something I think we still struggle with at times right now as far as talking about business, but we definitely find somehow to make that time. And it used to be great date nights where we always went for Mexican and got ice cream after, and it was great. You left the house, we kind of got dressed up. Now, we still do that sometimes.
His family remained central. His sons, now old enough to understand their father's extraordinary accomplishments, became increasingly featured in his content. The passing of knowledge, the transfer of values that extended beyond merely how to lift heavy objects. Through it all, Brian maintained the perspective that had separated him from the beginning. Strength was never just about winning titles. It was about becoming the best version of himself, about pushing the limits of what his unique physical gifts could accomplish, about building something that would outlast his time on the competition platform. Brian Shaw's legacy extends far beyond his 4 World's Strongest Man titles. His impact on strength sports exists on multiple levels: technical, commercial, philosophical. Technically, he revolutionized preparation in strongman, brought a level of analysis and methodology previously unseen, transformed training from tradition-bound routines to scientifically optimized protocols. Future generations of strongmen trained differently because Brian showed a better way. Commercially, he demonstrated that niche strength athletes could build global brands, that authenticity and education could reach audiences far beyond hardcore fans. He helped bring strongman from obscurity into mainstream awareness through content that didn't dumb down the sport, but made it accessible. Philosophically, he showed a different path to greatness, not through controversy or persona, but through consistent excellence and genuine character. He became living proof that extraordinary achievements didn't require extraordinary ego. The sport of strongman grew dramatically during Brian's era. Participation increased, viewer numbers climbed, prize purses expanded. While many factors contributed to this growth, Brian's ambassadorship played a significant role. He made superhuman feats relatable, made giants seem approachable. His influence extended to adjacent strength communities. Powerlifters adopted his methodologies. CrossFit athletes studied his movement patterns. Even ordinary gym-goers implemented scaled versions of his techniques. This wasn't just a champion completing his competitive cycle. This was a paradigm shift in how strength sports operate, prepare, and present themselves to the world. Beyond the titles and records, what made Brian Shaw's story resonant was the humanity behind the superhuman achievements. Despite his massive frame and accomplishments, his demeanor remained understated. No manufactured persona, no character played for cameras. Just an authentic individual who happened to be extraordinarily good at lifting heavy objects. His relationship with his wife Carrie revealed a partnership of equals, not the stereotype of the dominant male athlete, but a thoughtful collaboration between accomplished individuals building something together. His parenting showed the gentle giant archetype in real life, massive hands that could lift cars, carefully helping small children with delicate tasks. The contrast between his competitive intensity and his patient, measured approach to fatherhood. His friendships within the strongman community, even with direct rivals, demonstrated sportsmanship rarely seen in elite athletics. The ability to fiercely compete against someone, then genuinely celebrate their accomplishments when they prevailed. The small-town values never left, even as success and recognition grew. No entitlement, no expectations of special treatment. The same courtesy extended to fans and strangers that he'd shown as a college basketball player from Fort Lupton. This wasn't just admirable on a human level. It was strategic brilliance. In a sporting landscape where controversy often drives attention, Brian built something more sustainable: respect. Not just from fans, but from peers, from business partners, from an entire industry. He didn't just master lifting weights. He mastered navigating a public life with private integrity. Brian Shaw didn't just lift weight. He showed weight. The weight of expectation, of potential, of legacy could be carried with grace. From a small Colorado town to the global stage. From a basketball prospect to a strength icon. From a young athlete to a father passing wisdom to the next generation. His story reminds us that extraordinary outcomes rarely come from extraordinary beginnings. They come from ordinary beginnings transformed through extraordinary commitment, through attention to detail, through the scientific application of basic principles. 4 world titles, dozens of records, millions of inspired fans, an entire sport elevated. The Colossus from Colorado, the methodical giant, the quiet revolutionary who redefined what's possible through strength of body and character. Brian Shaw,